Welcome to the Transforming Healthcare Coaching Podcast, where we're all about helping healthcare professionals like you create positive change at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Transforming Healthcare Coaching Podcast. And this week, we have an exciting topic. That is medical malpractice, litigation, and the effects on all of us as clinicians. And so I'm super excited to have Dr. Gita Pensa with us today. And she's on many other realms and spheres you might know her, but I'm going to let her introduce herself today in terms of what we're going to talk about with malpractice, litigation, and stress.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gita Pensa. I am an emergency physician by training. I also am a well-being coach for medical defendants in litigation. I do witness preparation work for insurance companies and attorneys, and I also help with peer support development for litigation-specific peer support programs.
Wow, that's a lot, and a lot of different hats in order to be able to help, because there's just so many different channels and avenues that people seek that particular very specialized assistance. And I'm really curious to start us off, what led you to speak publicly and educate clinicians in healthcare about the emotional toll of a malpractice litigation?
The short answer to that is that I was a defendant in a case that lasted for 12 years, and I went on trial twice. The first time in 2011, the 4.5-week trial, and then the second time was 2018. And I had been in a very dark place for much of it, for probably the better part of a decade. Past my first trial, I won at my first trial. I didn't really feel like much of a victory. And despite still practicing, I kept showing up to work. I was still miserable. I was trying to raise 3 kids. It was just, I had this lost decade. And when I found out that the plaintiffs were going to appeal my victory, and then eventually the verdict got overturned 4 years later, I realized that I was in pretty significant trouble. And so that was 2015. And so what's happened in the decade that followed was that I decided that I thought maybe there was a different way to approach this. And I became somewhat of a student of tort law, legal performance, digging yourself out of a hole in all the ways, burnout and just depression, anxiety, all of it. And what I learned was that there are definitely better ways to do this. And by the time I went on trial the second time in 2018, I had done a total 180. I'd really changed up everything from my career to the way I thought about myself to knowing exactly what to do in a courtroom. I invited my residents to come watch me testify. I was very open and honest about it. There's stories on, I have my own podcast. There's stories about a ballroom dance competition I was in the week before. I was a very different person, and it was like this experiment, trial A, intervention, trial B, N of 1, of course, but decided that there was a skill set and a mindset that could be learned because I had learned it. And if it could be learned, then it could be taught. And since then, I've really made it my mission to teach about it, to coach around it, to raise awareness around it. That's where I have a podcast called Doctors and Litigation, the L Word. I started that in 2019. That's where that came from. And I overall feel like we could be doing this very differently in medicine, and it would change a lot for a lot of people if we were to make certain changes.
I really see the parallels. There are so many healthcare professionals who do undergo the litigation process and are alone, 100% alone. And I can count on my hands a few other prominent emergency physicians who do help on a one-on-one basis, different clinicians. But what you describe is really common. There are so many solitary individuals just suffering in silence, thinking that there is no other way to get support. And it's such a chronic length of time that you need support for.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These things, obviously mine was 12 years, but usually 3 to 5 at a minimum. And people show up and they're told not to talk about it. Like, that's the party line from attorneys and the insurance companies. And we've all been trained not to talk about it out of shame, or no one really models talking about it openly. So we just perpetuate that cycle.
Right. And in some ways, it's similar to even a lot of the things that we do with the leadership and well-being coaching that we do at Transforming Healthcare Coaching. People don't even necessarily talk about how to be well, even amidst all of this adversity. And so I'm curious, even though lawyers may state that you can't talk about the details of the actual case to other humans, it's the stressors, it's the emotional and physical burdens of the chronicity of the legal process
Yeah.
is the actual problem.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, what have you been seeing as the most common and psychological and emotional reactions that physicians experience during or after malpractice lawsuit? Just so that we can name it, because I think a lot of people don't know.
Yeah. I think there are two primary ones. One is fear and one is shame. And fear can be a driver, then it can manifest in a couple of ways. It can manifest as anger, it can manifest as just profound anxiety and catastrophizing, panic, physiology, generally hiding. And the shame keeps us from really seeking out avenues to support us. The shame around it keeps us from, even though intellectually we may know that talking about, first, someone is telling you not to talk about it in blanket terms, and then you feel like you ought not to. But when you have shame around something, you're usually not seeking out other people to talk to about it because you are ashamed. And so it becomes this real stew of really difficult emotions. But I would say fear, which can drive anxiety, depression, or anger for some people. And then shame is a counterpart.
And so with the fear and the shame, I can't imagine that that would be good for being able to be the best version of yourself, no matter how well rested, how much you work out, how much good nutrition you have whenever you show up for work. I'm curious, if all of these emotions are chronically brewing in an individual, how does that litigation process uniquely affect our own ability to show up as a physician or a nurse practitioner or a clinician in those moments, especially in high-risk specialties like emergency medicine or critical care? I guess I have a vested interest in those
Yeah,
specialties.
of course. It can have a devastating effect. For many of us, we use the term litigation stress, and litigation stress has this tendency to not just affect the psychological, but also cognitive, behavioral, interpersonal, spiritual, like virtually every sphere of somebody's life, and your physical health. Really intense stress, like any chronic ongoing stressor, like a person in your family who's ill or something like that, like it will affect you. It will seep into other things. Now, depending on your degree of distress, you may be able to lock it in at times of importance and show up and do your thing. And I did that for years. I would pull up to the emergency department and I would cry in my car and now I want to get out. And then I would just myself up and then go in and then just zoom in on, this is the job. I'm just going to do it. I call it like white knuckling my way through a shift. And then I would be done and so grateful. It was like watching the hours. But what doesn't happen in those, when you're just trying to show up and scrape by your fingernails, like you really don't feel fulfilled. You will get burned out. This becomes this chronic cycle where it's just misery after misery. And unless you deal with the original stressor or find a way to really not just cope, but really put it in perspective, the litigation piece of it, everything else will tend to suffer. And some people come in with different mindsets. Some people are just like, you know what, this is business. I'm not going to let it bother me. But it is the minority of us, I find, that for a really serious allegation, when something really bad happened to somebody and you feel bad about what happened, whether or not you feel like it was your fault, it's going to start to eat at you. And then when people are coming at you, really saying, you are bad at this, you are negligent, you're a bad person and a bad doctor, then it really does start to take a toll.
Yeah, I like to think of ourselves as clinicians, especially physicians, as athletes. And I don't think many people think of ourselves that way in terms of the fact we do really have to be physically able, mentally, cognitively able, and emotionally aware to be able to provide good care to patients at any time. And even if you have really great mindset and really great ability to see the challenges maybe for what they are, like a legality or a piece of paper or just facts, no matter how you look at things, we see that one thing in your life will definitely bleed into other areas of your life.
Yeah, very much so.
And I'm wondering, in that process, a lot of times we think about whether it's a chronic stressor like a marriage or a death or a caregiving burden, the trauma of going through a litigation case. We all also know, like, trauma, there's a lot of growth that comes from it, post-traumatic growth. And I'm curious if you have any stories to share of your clients in terms of what that journey may look like in terms of, or your own, in terms of what the growth portion looks like, because it seems inconceivable, I think, for anyone who's listening who has a chronic case sort of open right now.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that people will experience post-traumatic growth, but there is certainly the potential for post-traumatic growth. And what the data seems to imply is that the potential for post-traumatic growth really depends on the person's belief in the possibility that eventually they will feel better. Eventually they will be able to find or make some kind of meaning out of these events. Eventually they will be able to. The problem with litigation is because we have never had modeling of it. You never got to see an attending do it in real time. You've never gotten to see anybody else process it. There are very few role models of resilience. There are very few role models of people who really suffered through this thing and then came out better on the other side. You don't have anyone to point to be like, oh, okay, that's an example of that. And so when you don't have examples, when you don't, when they say representation matters, if you don't have someone to look at and be like, that person is a very good doctor and they dealt with a whole lot and now they're better than ever. If that is not available to you, then you may not actually believe that is a possibility. And so that's thing one that we do wrong in medicine, is that our inability to talk about this really openly and in a vulnerable way, and to demonstrate to learners that, like, you respect me as your attending, but let me tell you something, like, this is something that I went through. This is how I did it. When we don't talk about our own personal stories and give people examples, they won't have that representation. They won't have that available to them to look at it. But yes, many stories of post-traumatic growth. Part of working with me as a coach, when we get to a certain point, if we're not doing like just strict witness preparation in terms of getting ready for an event, if it's really just general well-being coaching around litigation and learning how to feel better and contend with it all, part of it is this shift into starting to believe in the possibility of using litigation as a catalyst to course correct in places where you feel like I teach people at first to use it as an excuse, which is what I started doing. Like, I am being sued and it's hard and I deserve to take better care of myself. And so I deserve to start making changes at work that free up some time for me. And so I deserve to quit this committee. And so I deserve to, not that we ever really need to deserve. We don't have to deserve to make changes in our lives that make us feel better, more aligned with who we want to be. But sometimes doctors are that way, right? So that's step one, is to be like, okay, let's do a little reframe where we use litigation as an excuse. Let's start taking better care of yourself. Let's start, if you need a half day off a week, right? Blame this. This is hard. And that's hard enough to admit that you're vulnerable enough and human enough that this is taking a toll. But you really could frame it as, I need to be okay. This is a marathon. And so I have to make changes in my life so that I can really lean into my life and still enjoy my life despite the fact that this thing is happening. And then we move from using it as an excuse to acknowledging that trauma can be a catalyst, right? This can be a catalyst. This can be a catalyst for me to look at my life in those CEO exercises. I'm going to look at my life in all of its domains and decide, what do I want to change? What do I want to do? Part of working with me, a lot of times I'll ask people to set some kind of goal, something that they've been wanting to do that they haven't done. And what winds up happening has been like, it just blows my mind, all the things that people have wound up doing. One person came to me and said something had happened, and she had sort of idly mentioned early on, the chairmanship is open and I was going to put my hat in the ring, but now I'm not going to do that. I feel like I don't deserve that. So we did a lot of work around that. And then she wound up realizing, like, these are not mutually exclusive things. You can be sued and also completely catapult in your career. And so she is now currently chairman of her department. Other people decided things like, you know what, I want to work less. I want to, whatever changes they wanted to make. That was why I went into academics. I wanted to figure out if I could love medicine again. I wanted to return to teaching and things like that. And that led to a lot of things. I have clients who just had a goal of, I wanted to go on this trip. I wanted to go on a safari. So this man decided to go on safari with his wife at the conclusion of the trial, which he did win. They went on safari. Somebody else wanted to restart her painting. And so she started painting again. And last I heard, had entered her work into a number of competitions. Somebody else biked the MS 150. He had stopped exercising and decided, as preparation for trial, he was going to get physically in shape again. And so he started going on bike rides. Then he challenged himself to sign up for the MS 150. He had a lot of fundraising around that. Amazing things. So I could really go on. A nurse went to space camp. It's amazing. It's amazing what people can do, and look back and think, wow, if I hadn't gotten sued and made these, changes in my life and used it as a catalyst for these things, I would never have done those things. And no one wants to get sued. And I look back on my journey and I think, a lot of good things have happened I would never choose to go through it again. But I like who I became afterwards. I like what I'm doing now. I like a lot of positive things have come out of that terrible thing. Not always possible to say for every tragedy in every life, but litigation is the thing. Like litigation it's not really a specific tragedy. This is like an occupational inevitability almost, certainly in emergency medicine, in a lot of fields. Like this is going to happen. And we should all know how to contend with it and take care of ourselves through it, understanding that this is a marathon and it does not need to be as soul-crushing and job-ending or potentially life-ending as we've historically let it be.
Yeah. So many things to unpack there, but I think I'll just sort of begin with the first thing about the fact that in training, we don't get to see this role model. And in any particular program, your N of possible people gets much smaller. And it's always very challenging to be on the other side of the wound so that you are able to be a teacher for the others. I mean, sometimes when you're thick of it, I mean, you really just can't be the teacher of what the lesson is yet. And so programs are sort of stuck with the fact that they don't have the right expert, which is why what you're doing is so important, to be able to support people nationwide so that there is a place that all program directors, residents in training, national organizations can point to. So there is a clearinghouse of a community of people and clients and your expertise, whether it be through the podcast, stimulate a conversation. It's like a book club, except now it's an audio club.
Yeah.
Begin the conversation, like based on one episode, some of the tensions. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, as I direct our wellbeing curriculum, does this fall more under, when we look at the curriculum for training, in most specialties, it's not quite clear where this content should fall. In the wellbeing side, we can see that this probably can often secretly begin the chronic problem that secretly eats at people that people don't want to talk about, and also begin maybe maladaptive coping mechanisms, depending on the group in the practice. And it can actually increase toxicity in a practice because one person is going through that and it take it out on everybody else.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of side effects. As a leader, we often coach leaders in healthcare. And if this is going on in your group, how does a manager, how does a vice chair, how does a department chair handle this and keep it healthy? Is it their job? Is it me as the wellness kind of lead? Do we have to external coaches for all of this? It's a challenging proposition. I'm wondering whether you have thoughts on how to make things different for the future.
I do think that there's probably, just like any medical issue, there's probably multifactorial things that have to happen. If someone's a diabetic, you can't just give them insulin. They have to also look at the diet, and they also have to exercise. They also have to there's a lot. So it's a big problem. This is a very big problem. And so there are multiple things I think that need to be addressed. And the two big ones are, one, there is a complete knowledge deficit around the skills required to be a good defendant. I feel like every doctor should know how to be a good defendant. And people will push back and say, it's a club I don't want to be in. You're going to be in the club. So maybe you should think about how to do it well. There are millions of things that we prepare for, that we sim, that we don't ever want to happen. But the point is that we know what to do when we're called upon. So beyond the anatomy of a lawsuit lecture that once in a while people will bring, that's more than a lot of people get, but something beyond the 4 elements of negligence, which is academic and beside the point for what really this thing is about. Someone who really gets it is going to have to teach people about it. So that's one thing, is that there's this huge knowledge deficit that I think belongs in actual regular curriculum. That is what I believe. The other part of it, though, are the skills that do fall under wellness and support, where a lot of it is addressing for people who are currently undergoing it and haven't had that sort of inoculation or of education, understanding, and everything like that, who are experiencing deep and profound shame and who are isolated, who are told to isolate and who self-isolate because of their own shame. They need help, and they need places to go to where they feel safe and that they're able to be understood and where they can be vulnerable. And how do we do that safely? And so that's a whole other thing where we're talking about. That's why I do work around litigation-specific peer support, because it's not just peer support. The people who are involved in caring for the person that is being sued have to understand how to navigate it, how to keep it safe. What happens if they get deposed? How do we keep this from being as non-discoverable as possible? How do we interdigitate this with risk? Those are all really important considerations. So I think it really needs to be this multi-pronged effort there is not a single fix. This is a very large problem that we have allowed to go unaddressed for as many generations as litigation has been a problem like this. And so it's going to be a bigger fix than people want it to be.
I love that answer because I think you've now hit on the theme of both are true, both
True.
in your story of the client who was sued and also is now department chair.
Yeah.
Both can happen. Great joys and also great problematic things to deal with. And so just noticing and naming the fact that you can still achieve great things even while you're in the chronicity of the deposition and legal process in general. And then also recognizing that it's going to take a team. So for the leaders out there listening, you yourself may want to get some skills and figure out who your own peer supporters and other resources, both coaching and therapy, both employee resources and HR resources and legal and risk resources. They're all available within your organization. If it's not in your organization or the quality isn't good, then you can go external. So I think that's the thing we often forget about is that we don't have to live in the silo. If what we're getting is just not the right timbre of connection that our physicians need in our group, then we need to start looking elsewhere to find the right type of support. Because I think what we all can also recognize geographically, gender-wise, culture-wise, generation-wise, we all need different things in that process of support.
Okay, very much. And I think that it's really hard to assume, but just because there have been, as I said, something like generations of doctors that don't know how to deal with this, that did not deal with it. And so sometimes in some institutions, they'll be like, oh, Joe, you got sued. You can talk to these people. Joe has not dealt with what it meant and has a lot of bitterness and has a lot of practice changes and everything like related to that and has not dealt with it. Joe is not the person that you want to, because then it is good to have someone who can commiserate, but it would also be a little better for Joe to have some skills and some perspective that can help that person move forward in a way that they start to realize this is just a point in time. And there is potential for me to be better on the other side, to learn to be a good defendant no matter what the outcome of this is, and that the outcome doesn't really mean anything about me. And all of the stuff that has to go along with, it's a journey, and people roll their eyes at that word, but it truly is. And it's one at the end of which you will be different, but some sort of idea of who do I use. There's a poem, a line of which asks, who will I be when I wake after enduring? And that is what I invite people to think about is like, how are you going to get this person to be someone that they aspire to be on the other side of the enduring? Because a lot happens in the enduring. And it behooves us to really set up structures where that person can really believe that they'll still be flourishing on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think whether it be a medical illness or for me, it was a divorce that catapulted me into this world to go back to school, become a coach, start a business, be here podcasting. There's always something on the other side. And I hope for our listeners, there are so many stories of people who have achieved that. And so we hope that you can see something of you in terms of your secret dreams that you often have lost for so many years and that all those decades of medical training. And to also know that a lawsuit is not the end of anything. The only question is, it's now an invitation to sort of see maybe a different path. And as coaches, we understand that that journey, that enduring, may sometimes feel very frustrating and also bring you great new opportunities. And we enjoy shepherding and walking alongside different individuals so that they can see their own flourishing, which is why I think we both have landed into a job where we're just here to make sure you're not alone. You're not alone in this crazy little path that now you get to craft on your own terms, which is, I think, what every physician often is a huge contributor to burnout. They feel the lack of autonomy.
Yeah.
Yet what if we could tell you the thing that was your worst nightmare, a lawsuit potentially, could become that path forward for you?
Yeah. And that's, I think, the more people see, not just me, but people in their own departments, people at their own hospital, the more open people are able to be about their stories and demonstrating themselves as, I did these things and like, did not stop me, just watch. Or even if they can, there's no reason that they can't talk about it in real time if it takes a certain degree of courage, I think, but to say, I am dealing with this right now, it does take a certain amount of acceptance and equanimity around the process, but I am dealing with, this is how I'm taking care of myself. No, I don't know what's going to happen, but this is how I'm preparing. And, you should understand that you can watch me do it. That's why I invited the residents. The residents knew. And that's why I invited them to come to trial to watch. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I knew what I was doing, at least. And I thought, how else are they going to learn? Then, of course, the next year's residents were like, could you do that again?
That's funny.
No, thank you.
Can you do that again?
Do it
No,
again.
no, thank you. No, thank you. It's funny. It makes me realize I probably should dust off that deposition sim that I had lying in the corner there in my day job. I also do sim education, and we probably should dust that back off. I mean, those are hard because it's a multi-person sim event with all of the legal team to come in to be able to pull that off. And so it does take a lot of orchestration to get there. Sometimes it's not so easy for different organizations to do that for so many residents because there are hundreds of residents out there.
Where like now the beauty of virtual education comes in. And so there are opportunities. Like I think you and I have talked about, I have a course, and in the course in one of the sessions is like a mock deposition with an attorney who deposes me. And so there are ways that I think that if we get creative and create additional resources, that my hope is that someday there will just be like way too many opportunities for people to learn about this.
That's really wonderful. So, what advice would you give to a physician who's out there listening, who's currently in the thick of a lawsuit and feeling isolated and ashamed? Where can they go? Where do they even begin? What should be like the list of different places they should explore for getting support?
That's what I made the podcast for. So the podcast was for the person who's really suffering, who doesn't really feel ready to talk to anybody. That's a place to start. It's a little frightening the first few episodes, but like you get through it, you keep listening, and then you start to learn, oh, like this is something I can learn how to do. I do encourage everybody to talk to somebody who gets it. And I know people who've gone through this process 6-7 years, didn't tell their spouse, did not tell anybody. And that's one of the hardest things I find for people is how do you start a conversation with somebody who doesn't really get it? If you're married to a physician, that's one thing. If you're not, or I'll give you an example of a physician who I worked with some time ago who was a young mother and was really close with other women in her mother's group, but felt like since this thing had happened, she had really taken a step back because there was this thing that if they found out, what would they think? So working on a script to like really introduce them to the topic of this is something really hard that I'm going through that I've been holding back from you. And you do that with people that you trust. And there are so many different things that people can do, but the first barrier is allowing yourself to trust somebody, trust with that, to be able to talk to them about it. Starting to learn about the process, being able to trust in somebody. Don't do it on social media and saying like, somebody that you like, that knows and loves you and believes in you. Talk to them about that, about the feelings that you're having and everything. And between those two things, you'll get braver. You will get braver. And so it's a sort of cycle that the more and the braver you feel, the more you feel up to learning. And then continuing the process of learning, preparing, and just recognize that it's a process, but it's a process that you're a smart person. As soon as we put away the stigma and the shame around this and we normalize this, like this, there's like a lot of other things that are occupational hazards that you absolutely can learn to not just contend with, but to be really good at, regardless of what landed you here. Like we can talk a lot about error and things like that, but everybody deserves to defend either themselves or the practice of medicine in general, which unfortunately sometimes involves error because we're humans.
That's a really great advice. And just start small with talking to someone who can support you.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that we have to name that so explicitly that we would hope that people, but I think you're right. I think a lot of healthcare professionals really bottle a lot inside.
Yeah. And I would give you a little practical tip is to just memorize the sentence. I've not talked to anybody but my legal team about the details of this case, the details of my care. Remembering that what's in the complaint is public record. Those aren't details of your care. You can say I was an 80-year-old woman and I'm being accused of, those are generalities, right? Like there's a lot that you can say that you just have to get comfortable with saying I haven't discussed the details, because the worst thing that can happen is that somebody gets deposed. So really talking about your feelings, whatever, like feelings aren't facts, right? Like or all us coaches like will emphasize the point, your feelings aren't facts, right? You feel something on one day and talk to somebody about how you feel, like that's going to change. Facts are facts, and just hold the actual detailed facts close, and the rest of it you can talk about.
Yeah, I love that. I'm wondering, are there any particular resources? You said you had mentioned some books or frameworks or communities that you think have been especially powerful for you or the physicians that you work with, or maybe tell us a little bit more about the offerings that you might have.
Yeah, so there are some books. I recommend Sarah Charles. So Sarah Charles was a psychiatrist and the first person to really research or write about any of it. So she was sued in the 1970s in federal court. She was a psychiatrist and was so effective. And there was really almost nothing written about this before her. And so she has a couple of books that one is called Defendant, that's about her experiences. The other is called Adverse Events, Stress and Litigation. And that is like this thick, and it's you want to deep dive into the psychiatric thoughts about litigation stress. That's a good one. But Eileen Brenner has a book called How to Survive a Medical Malpractice Lawsuit. I recommend that a lot. She's actually an emergency physician, and she wrote it with her dad, who was a medical malpractice defense attorney. And so it's a very easy primer, you can just read it. I used to recommend often this book called When Good Doctors Get Sued, which I liked a lot, but I think it might be out of print, so it might be hard to get. But someone gave that to me, and I just like the title because it's just a reminder to you, good doctors do get sued. Often, actually. And I have, again, there's the podcast. I have a course called LEAP, which is Litigation, Education, and Performance for clinicians. I'm going to be offering it again in the fall. We just finished up our first cohort of that. Really great reviews, really excited about it. If you go to my website, I'll have stuff about that enrolling in the fall. You can get CME credits for it. And that really is what's more, you're learning about the actual process of litigation, the strategy behind it, as well as really the coaching, a lot of the coaching techniques that I teach people going through it, some reframes of thought, and really how to present yourself. So we get in deep into a bunch of stuff, but yeah, it's exciting.
That's awesome. So we're going to put all the comments in the show notes for all the different resources that you just mentioned. Great. And so as we come to a close, I am so deeply appreciative to have someone who can really debunk and demystify and provide a potentially new way forward to inspire those who are in the teaching and leading of others in healthcare to maybe it doesn't have to always be this way, and to give hope to those who are in the thick of a suit themselves. And so as we come to a close, I'm wondering, what do you wish every healthcare professional knew about surviving and thriving after litigation?
I wish that everybody understood that this case is a blip in your life and what it means. Your life, your career is so much more than this one case. There will be a magnifying glass on this case for years, but that's not who you are. You are this wonderful human being, and all the people that you've helped over the years, and there are thousands of them. And don't lose sight of that. Don't let that become just wallpaper for you. There is great meaning in that, and lean into it.
That's a wonderful way to conclude. I mean, I think we often forget that we are not our CV, we are not our title, and we are not just our prefecture of doctor. Thank you so much, Dr. Pensa, for being here on with us, and we look forward to sharing with our audience all the different resources and opportunities with you for those and debunk and demystify the landscape of what litigation looks like and that you can thrive after malpractice suit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and share with a colleague who would benefit. Together, we can transform healthcare one person at a time. Find us anywhere you find your podcasts. Ready to take your healthcare leadership journey to the next level? Book a discovery call, free, at transforminghealthcarecoaching.com to explore our personalized coaching packages designed specifically for healthcare professionals like you.